She stood in the doorway, and for a second no one spoke. Why did silence always arrive before doubt? They looked at her the way people look at storms on the horizon, measuring, guessing, deciding if they should be afraid. 12 men in gear, maps on the walls, weapons in racks, and her, 5'3", calm face, quiet eyes. Captain Blackwell introduced her, assistant team leader. No applause, no welcome, just weight in the air. She felt it settle on her shoulders, not fear, expectation, and something colder, disbelief. She took her seat without asking for permission, hands folded, back straight. Her name was Mackenzie Thorne, Navy SEAL, daughter of a man whose name still moved through this building like a ghost. She could feel it when they looked at her. They weren't seeing her training, her trident, her years in the dark. They were seeing her difference. And she'd learned something early in life. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It waits. Later, on a dusty training Matt shared with Army Rangers, the waiting ended. A joke had been made about her father, about women, about what didn't belong. She didn't shout, didn't threaten, she just stepped forward. 5 men volunteered to teach her a lesson. They didn't last a minute. 43 seconds. When the last one tapped out, gasping on the floor, she stood shaking, not from fear but from release, from carrying something heavy for too long. Respect is strange, it arrives late, but when it comes it stays. That afternoon, Captain Blackwell called her into his office. He had a file, old photos, new danger. A dying man in Poland. An old spy with secrets that could break nations. Russians already moving to silence him. We need someone who can move fast, quiet, close, Blackwell said. His eyes didn't blink. We need you. She said yes before fear could answer first. That night she walked alone on the beach. The ocean didn't care about rank or legacy. It just moved. She took out her phone, looked at the only photo she had of her father, smiling before his last mission. I'm trying, she whispered. I'm really trying. The next morning, she jumped out of a plane at 28,000 feet into black sky. The air cut like glass. Her breath came through a mask. Her heart stayed steady. They landed in a frozen forest near the Belarus border, 6 shadows moving where no one should be. The facility looked dead, Soviet concrete, broken windows, rusted towers. But death sometimes pretends. Inside, the old man waited, Klaus Vandenberg, thin as regret, eyes full of things he could never forget. They are coming, he said. They always come. They moved him fast, too fast for his failing heart. The Russians arrived sooner than expected. Gunfire in the trees, shouts in a language she didn't speak but understood. They ran. She carried the old man when his legs gave out. Her lungs burned, her arms screamed. She didn't stop. When his heart failed, it failed quietly, in her arms. He pressed a small drive into her teammate's hand. For my granddaughter, he whispered, then nothing. They crossed the border with bullets behind them. Back at a safe house, the CIA cracked the drive. 53 names. 12 still active. 1 a sitting U.S. senator. The room went silent in a way she didn't trust. The CIA man said, "This never happened." She felt something crack, not loud but deep. Her father had died believing in enemies you could see. But what about the ones you could? She waited until no one was watching. Then she copied the files. On the flight home, she stared at the clouds and felt heavier than she ever had in combat. She checked into a hotel under a false name, looked at the files again. One name burned brighter than the rest. Senator Richard Carver. She thought of her father, of honor, of oaths. She called a newspaper. "Someone has betrayed this country," she said, "and I have proof." The story exploded. And so did her life. They didn't arrest her at the base gate. They took her to a warehouse. A woman in a gray suit waited. CIA, Deputy Director Vance. "You don't understand the damage you've done," Vance said. "We were building a case. Slowly, carefully, you warned everyone." Mackenzie felt her certainty bend. Not break, but bend. "I thought the truth mattered," she said. "It does," Vance replied, "but timing is also a weapon." Mackenzie gave her statement, every detail, every mistake. When Garrett arrived, the old SEAL who'd trained her like a second father, he listened without judging. "Doing right isn't clean," he said quietly, "but neither is doing nothing." She testified before the Senate. Some believed her, some hated her, some were afraid of what she proved. Her career ended without ceremony. No parade, no speech, just papers and silence. She went to Arlington alone, knelt at her father's grave. "I tried to be brave the way you were," she said. "I don't know if I did it right." Wind moved through the trees, like an answer that didn't use words. Months later, Captain Blackwell found her there. "You mattered," he told her, "even when it cost you." He handed her an envelope, a classified commendation she could never show anyone. "No one will know," he said, "but some of us will." She walked away lighter than she had in years. Not because she'd won, but because she'd stopped running from herself. 6 months later, she stood on the same beach where she once whispered to the ocean. Civilian clothes, no rank, no mission. Garrett stood beside her, old and steady. "You sure about teaching?" he asked. She nodded. "Not tactics, not weapons. I want to teach what no one taught me." "What's that?" "How to stand when the world tells you to sit." She watched young recruits run along the shore, some scared, some proud, some pretending not to be either. She saw herself in them. The girl who walked into a room full of doubt. The woman who carried an old man through gunfire. The soldier who broke her own future to protect a country that might never thank her. She had learned something no training manual ever taught. That strength isn't loud. That courage isn't clean. That dignity doesn't beg to be seen. Sometimes it just acts. And sometimes that has to be enough. Why did every step she took toward the mat feel heavier than the last? Mackenzie could hear the low murmur of voices before she even reached the gym. Rangers, SEALs, instructors, men who had learned to hide fear behind jokes and muscle. The smell of sweat and old canvas hung in the air like memory. She paused at the door. Not because she was scared, because she was tired of being measured before being known. Inside, the training ring was already circled. A ranger sergeant stood in the center, tall, broad, arms crossed like he owned gravity. Someone had said something about her father, something ugly, something meant to cut. She didn't answer with words. She stepped forward. "I'll take him," she said. A laugh moved through the room, soft, cruel. The first fight ended fast. She slipped inside his reach, took his balance, used his size against him. He hit the mat hard, shock in his eyes, silence in the room. Another stepped in, then another. Each one came with something to prove. Each one left with something broken, pride, breath, certainty. When the fifth man tapped, the referee stared at his watch like it had lied to him. 43 seconds. Noise exploded, cheers, swearing, disbelief. Mackenzie stepped back into her corner, hands shaking now. Not from weakness, from everything she'd been holding back finally leaving her body. Garrett handed her a knife, not as a weapon but like a blessing. "Your father would have smiled at that," he said. She almost cried, almost. Later in Blackwell's office, the mood changed. Maps, photos, snow-covered forests. A dying man in Poland. A secret that could wake ghosts. "You're on the team," Blackwell said, "because today you showed you can fight when it's personal." That night, she didn't sleep. She ran on the beach until her lungs hurt, until her father's face in her memory softened instead of burned. The jump came before dawn. High altitude, cold air, oxygen masks. She didn't pray, she just breathed. The forest swallowed them quietly. They moved like shadows, slow, patient. Every branch snapping sounded like a gunshot in her head. When they saw the facility, it looked like a skeleton of a country that no longer existed. They chose the west approach, quietest, hardest. Inside, darkness waited. She took the hallway alone, weapon light cutting narrow truth into wide lies. At the basement, she found him. Klaus Vandenberg. Old, small, afraid. And still dangerous because of what he knew. "I am ready," he said, though his body said otherwise. They moved him out as Russians closed in. Gunfire behind them, concrete shattering, voices yelling orders she didn't understand but felt in her spine. She dragged him through snow. He apologized for slowing her down. She told him not to waste breath on shame. When they reached the vehicle, he was barely alive. They drove hard, too hard. When his heart failed, it failed like a candle in wind. He gave them the drive. Then he gave nothing else. She stared at his still face and thought of her mother. Cancer had taken her the same way, quietly, unfairly. At the safe house, the truth came out. A senator, traitors, names that wore suits instead of uniforms. The CIA man said it would disappear. Mackenzie felt something inside her say no before she had time to think. She copied the files. She knew it was wrong. She also knew it felt right. On the plane home, she imagined her father sitting beside her, not speaking, just watching. At the hotel, she stared at the name that mattered most. Senator Richard Carver. She called the paper. After that, nothing was hers anymore. They took her to a warehouse. CIA, cold eyes, colder words. "You don't see the whole board," the woman told her. Mackenzie wanted to say maybe the board was broken. She gave her statement, every breath of it. When Garrett came, she finally let herself shake. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she said. "You were," he said. "You just did it in a world that punishes that." She testified, lost everything she'd built. She went to her father's grave and told him she didn't know who she was anymore. The wind didn't answer. Months passed. She taught now, not weapons, people. Young recruits who carried fear like a second heart. She told them what no one had told her. That you can be right and still lose. That losing doesn't make you wrong. That dignity doesn't need permission. Sometimes it just acts. She woke up in the dark and couldn't remember where she was. Why did the silence feel louder than gunfire? For a second she thought she was still in Poland, still smelling snow and cordite, still hearing the old man breathe like it cost him something. But the ceiling above her was smooth, white, civilian. A hotel room, near the airport, the night she decided to end her own life as she knew it. Her phone lay on the table like a quiet threat. Inside it were names that could ruin men who had spent their lives pretending to protect others. Power didn't look dangerous. It looked respectable. She sat up slowly, every muscle hurt. Not from training, this was the ache of consequence. She showered without turning on the light, let the dark stay. It felt honest. When she dressed, she chose plain clothes, jeans, jacket, nothing that said who she used to be. She left through the side door and walked until the cold made her breathe deeper. The city didn't know what she carried. People passed her with coffee and phones and problems that felt small from where she stood. She went to a payphone, one of the few left. It felt like touching a ghost. She called the number she'd memorized. Washington Post tip line. "I have proof," she said again. Her voice didn't shake. "If you want it, you move fast." They did. The files left her hands through wires and code and distance. Once they were gone, she felt lighter and terrified. She destroyed the phone, slowly, like it deserved respect. Then she turned herself in. At the gate of the naval base, the guard looked at her like he didn't know what to do with someone who wasn't trying to run. "I need NCIS," she said. "Now." She waited 10 minutes, 15. Every second rewrote her future. The men who came weren't NCIS. They moved like predators pretending to be polite. They didn't take her to an office. They took her to a warehouse. That was when she knew this wasn't about law. It was about control. Inside, a woman waited behind a desk like she'd been born there. "Deputy Director Vance." "You've made a very serious mistake," Vance said. Mackenzie didn't sit until she was told. "You leaked classified intelligence." "I exposed traitors," Mackenzie said. "You exposed our investigation," Vance replied. "You warned everyone we were watching." Mackenzie felt the first real crack in her certainty. She hadn't thought about the long game, about shadows fighting shadows. "What was I supposed to do?" she asked quietly. "You were supposed to trust us," Vance said, "and you didn't." Mackenzie almost laughed. Trust had killed her father. Trust had let cancer take her mother slowly. Trust felt like something people with safety could afford. Vance gave her a choice: talk, disappear for a while, or go to prison for the rest of her life. Mackenzie chose truth. For hours she spoke: Poland, the jump, the old man, the drive, the copy, the call. When Garrett arrived, she felt 12 years old again. "I messed up," she said. He listened, didn't interrupt, didn't rescue her. "You didn't mess up," he said when she finished. "You just learned how ugly right can look." They let her testify. The room was full of men who wore patriotism like jewelry. Some believed her, some wanted her gone. When they asked if it was worth ending her career, she said, "Ask me after you arrest the traitors." They didn't answer. After, she walked out of the building with nothing left to lose. She went to Arlington, knelt where her father rested. "I tried to be like you," she whispered. "I don't know if I was brave or stupid." The wind moved through the trees. She took that as enough. Her discharge papers came in the mail. General, quiet, final. No ceremony. Just an ending. She packed her uniforms into a box she didn't know where to put. Then she took a job teaching, at first just fitness, then mindset. Young men, young women, all afraid in their own ways. She didn't tell war stories, she told truth. That courage doesn't feel like movies. That doing right can ruin you. That losing a life you love doesn't mean you lost yourself. Some nights she still dreamed of Poland, of snow, of an old man's hand going cold in hers. She woke up with tears she didn't remember making. But every morning she stood back up, because that was the only answer she had left. And sometimes it was enough. She thought she was done being hunted. Why did it feel like something was still watching her? The letter arrived without a return address, just her name, clean handwriting, no emotion in the ink. She stared at it for a long time before opening it, not because she was afraid of what it said, but because she was afraid of what it might wake up inside her. It was from Blackwell. Not a mission order, not an apology, just a message. "They're moving again, quietly, and they remember you." No details, no explanation. But her chest tightened the way it only did when danger felt close but invisible. She burned the letter after reading it twice. Then she sat in her small apartment and listened to the city breathe. Cars, voices, sirens, all of it normal, all of it fragile. She had a life now: teaching, morning runs, coffee with people who didn't know what she used to be. Some days she almost believed she was just a woman who had survived something. Then the first sign came. A man across the street who read the same newspaper every day and never turned the page. A car that showed up too often in places that had nothing to do with her. A phone call with no one on the other end. She didn't panic. She observed. Old habits don't die, they wait. One night she took a different route home, twice. The car followed both times. That was when she knew. They hadn't forgotten her. She didn't call the police. She didn't call Blackwell. She didn't call Garrett. She trusted what had kept her alive before. Movement, silence, choice. She packed a bag. Not weapons, clothes, cash, old running shoes. She left before dawn and took a bus to nowhere specific. For 3 days she moved. On the 4th night, someone finally made a mistake. A man followed her into a bus terminal bathroom. He wasn't subtle. He was nervous. "Don't do this," she said without turning. He lunged. She didn't break him. She didn't humiliate him. She disarmed him and pinned him just long enough to take his phone. There was a message on it. "She's confirmed active." No name, no reason. Just her. She let him go. People who were tools weren't worth becoming. She called Blackwell from a burner phone. "They're not done," she said. "I know," he replied, "and neither are you." He told her what he could. Pieces. Rumors. Men who had lost power because of the files she released were trying to find the leak behind the leak. Not to arrest her. To erase her. "You can disappear," Blackwell said, "or you can stop running." She didn't answer right away. She thought of her students, their nervous smiles, the way they trusted her to show them how not to break. She thought of her father, standing alone so others could leave. "I'm tired of hiding," she said. They met in a place that didn't matter, a diner near a highway, loud enough to hide anything. Blackwell didn't look like a captain anymore. He looked like a man who had lost more than he admitted. "They don't have legal power," he said. "They have money, connections, shadows." "So we use light," she said. He nodded, "and witnesses." They began quietly. Not hacking, not stealing. Talking. To people who had been threatened, silenced, paid. People who had lost careers, families, names. She didn't tell them who she was. She just listened. Some cried, some lied. Some begged her not to leave their stories in the dark. Every story added weight. Every name added danger. One night her apartment door had been forced. Nothing taken, just a message. "You should have stayed gone." She didn't clean it right away. She wanted to feel the truth of it. They tried to run her off the road a week later. That was when fear finally reached her bones. Not loud fear. The quiet kind that says, "You can die for this." She sat in her car afterward, hands shaking, not from impact, but from realizing how small a body is when power decides it doesn't matter. She almost quit that night. Almost called Garrett and said she wanted out. But then she remembered something he once told her. "You don't live with what you do, you just decide what it means." She decided it would mean something. They gathered enough voices to make silence impossible. Not all at once, but enough. A story broke, then another. Not about her. About the men who thought no one would ever say their names. The threats increased, but so did the eyes watching. She moved less, spoke less, trusted carefully. She slept with her phone in her hand like a weapon she couldn't fire. One night walking home, she felt it again, that sense of being measured. This time she didn't run. She stopped. "Come out," she said. A man stepped from the shadow, not the same as before, older, calmer. "You made powerful enemies," he said. "So did they," she replied. He studied her. "You could still walk away." She shook her head. "So could you." He didn't smile, but something in his face changed. "Be careful," he said. "History doesn't protect people like you." She watched him leave and wondered if that had been a threat or a warning. That night she couldn't sleep. Not because she was afraid, but because she knew something now. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about choosing what kind of story she would leave behind. And for the first time since she'd taken off her uniform, she felt like she was wearing something again. Not rank, responsibility. She didn't know which scared her more, the men who wanted her gone, or the people who were starting to believe her. Belief is dangerous, it creates motion, and motion attracts eyes. The stories she and Blackwell had helped surface were spreading, not loud, not viral, but steady like water finding cracks in stone. Officials resigning for health reasons, quiet investigations, careers ending without explanation. None of it had her name on it, but she could feel the shadow of her work moving across the country. She changed routines every day now. Different routes, different times, no patterns. She taught in the mornings, listened in the afternoons, moved at night. Her students noticed she was quieter. One of them, a young woman with shaking hands and stubborn eyes, asked her, "Are you leaving?" Mackenzie didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I don't know how long I get to stay anywhere." The girl nodded like she understood more than she should. The first real loss came quietly. One of the men who had spoken to her, a former analyst who had been fired after raising concerns, was found dead in his apartment. Officially, it was ruled an accident, gas leak, no foul play. But Mackenzie had sat across from him, had seen how badly he wanted to live long enough to matter. She stood in her kitchen that night and stared at the wall for a long time. This was the price. Not her life. Other people's. She called Blackwell. "They're killing the witnesses," she said. "They always did," he replied. "We just didn't always know their names." She almost said she was done. Almost. But quitting wouldn't bring the man back. It would just make his death easier to forget. They changed tactics. Less exposure, more protection, fewer stories at once, safer timing. But safety is a rumor, not a promise. One night, someone broke into her apartment again. This time they left something behind. A photograph. Her and her students, taken from across the street. Her hands shook as she held it. They weren't just threatening her anymore. They were aiming at what she cared about. She moved the next morning without telling anyone where she went. No goodbye, no note. She left teaching behind like a limb she still felt even after it was gone. She drove until the road stopped feeling familiar. Rented a room with cash and a name that wasn't hers. For weeks she did nothing but wait and listen. She watched the news, the silence, the gaps. She dreamed of Poland again, of carrying someone who couldn't be saved. Some nights she woke up whispering, "I'm sorry," and didn't know to whom. Blackwell visited once, just once. "You can still leave," he said. "Disappear for real." She looked at him and let them finish what they started. He didn't argue. That scared her more than if he had. They planned something final, not violent, not loud. Irreversible. A package of evidence. Names, money trails, recorded threats, witness statements, everything. If they released it, there would be no putting it back. But neither of them would be safe afterward. "You don't have to do this," Blackwell said. She thought of her father, standing in a place no one else would. "I already did," she said. The release was scheduled for a Sunday night. They chose it because power liked weekends, less oversight, fewer people paying attention. She spent that day alone. No phone, no news, no movement. She walked by a river and watched it carry things away without asking what they were. She wondered if this was how endings always felt, quiet before they were. At midnight, Blackwell sent one word. "Done." She sat on the floor and felt her body finally understand what she'd chosen. Within hours, the world started shaking. Arrests, warrants, hearings. Men who had never imagined handcuffs suddenly learning how cold they were. Her name still didn't appear, but the shadows were screaming. She moved again and again. She didn't go back to teaching, didn't go back to anything. She lived like a rumor. But something strange happened. People began to talk about courage again. Not in movies, not in slogans. In quiet places, in hard choices. She saw a clip online, blurred faces, altered voices of people who had spoken out because someone else had first. She turned off the screen and cried for the first time in months. Not from fear, from release. But victory doesn't end danger. It just changes who is angry. She knew they would keep coming. She also knew she wouldn't stop. Because somewhere, in places she would never see, people were standing up in rooms where they used to sit down. And she had learned something. Sometimes you don't get to live the life you wanted. You get to live the one that needs you. She didn't hear the shot. She felt the air move first. That was the strange thing about danger. Sometimes it arrived before sound. The glass behind her shattered. She hit the floor before she knew she was falling. Her heart didn't race. It went cold. Not fear, focus. She crawled toward the back of the cabin, breath shallow, counting steps in her head the way she used to in training. The room smelled like old wood and dust. Somewhere outside, boots moved in a way that didn't belong to hikers. She hadn't used her real name in months, hadn't told anyone where she was, and still they had found her. She slipped out the back window and into trees that felt like strangers. The ground cut her palms. She didn't care. Blood was just proof she was still moving. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs forgot what they were for. Then she hid, not cleverly, not bravely, just enough. She lay under wet leaves and listened. Voices, low, patient, men who didn't need to rush because time usually worked for them. She thought of her father, of standing where no one else would. She didn't move. After hours or minutes, she couldn't tell the voices left. She didn't cry when it was over. She just felt tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. She walked all night and found a road at dawn. A farmer gave her water without asking her name. She thanked him like it mattered. Blackwell found her 2 days later. "You should have died," he said quietly. "Not yet," she replied. They didn't talk about fear. They talked about what was left. The men they'd exposed were mostly in prison now, some dead, some silent. But not all of them. Power doesn't like endings, Blackwell said. It just changes faces. She had a choice now. Keep running. Or stop. She thought of the students she'd left, the woman with shaking hands, the man who died for telling the truth, the old man in Poland whose last breath had been an apology. "I don't want to be a shadow," she said. "I want to be a voice." Blackwell looked at her like he was afraid for her. "Voices get shot," he said. "So do shadows," she replied. They planned the last thing she would ever do. Not a leak. Not a report. A story. Her story. Everything her father, the training, the jump, the old man, the files, the threats, the deaths, the running. No names that would endanger lives. No secrets that would start wars. Just truth about what power does to people and what people can do to power. They worked with one journalist, just one. A woman who had lost a brother in a classified incident no one would explain. She understood silence the way Mackenzie did. When the story went live, it didn't scream. It breathed. It moved through people slowly, deeply. They didn't see her as a soldier. They saw her as someone who had chosen not to disappear. Messages came, thousands. Not praise. Recognition. I thought I was alone. I thought I was crazy. I thought no one would listen. She read them in the dark and felt something heal that she hadn't known was broken. The threats didn't stop. But they changed. They sounded afraid now. She stayed in one place for the first time in years. Small town, quiet mornings, long walks. People didn't know her story. They just knew she helped at the school, that she listened when others talked. Sometimes kids asked her if she had ever been scared. She always answered honestly. Every day. "But you're still here," one boy said. She smiled, "So are you." Years later, she went back to Arlington. Same trees, same wind. She stood where her father rested and spoke out loud without worrying who might hear. "I didn't become you," she said. "I became me." She felt no answer. And she didn't need one. Because she finally understood something she had carried through every fight, every loss, every choice. That courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something else matters more. And sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.